Hello everyone, welcome to our fourth and final lesson in our printmaking unit. You've come a long way since we started to explore lino printing, and I'm really excited about today because we will not only learn a new technique but also start planning your final artwork. Before we get into the lesson, I want to remind you of our unit's overarching theme of self-expression. Printmaking is such a powerful way to express who we are, and each of our techniques you've learnt, lino printing, etching, and now dry point printing, gives you your unique tools to tell your story. Here's what we're going to be going through today. First, we'll recap what we've learnt using a quiz. Then we'll dive into dry point printing, a method that adds another layer of creativity to your toolkit. It's something we touched on in going over etching, but I'm just going to go into more detail and provide you more information about this technique. And finally, we'll be starting to plan your final artwork. This piece will allow you to choose the printmaking technique that resonates with your vision the most and create a piece that reflects you. To begin, let's recap the key concepts and techniques from the last 3 lessons. I want to see how much you remember, so to get together we're going to go over a quick quiz. I'll leave the correct answers at the end of today's presentation. So the first question is, what is the main tool used to carve a lino block? The second question, what is the purpose of using acid in the etching process? Third, how can printmaking techniques be used to express emotions or personal identity? Fourth, what is one challenge artists face when carving lino blocks? I look forward to seeing your answers for these questions. I encourage you to try to recap over the lessons if you get the chance, just to freshen up your learning on each of these techniques in order to create your final piece. But to briefly go over what we've learned so far, lino printing involves carving away areas to leave behind a raised surface for printing, and etching is about using acid to create grooves, resulting in a more intricate and detailed final print. Today we'll be adding dry point printing to the mix. This brings its own unique aesthetic and creative opportunities. Let's explore it together. Dry point printing is a technique that artists have used for centuries to create delicate, textured and highly expressive prints, unlike lino printing, where you carve away materials, or in etching, which uses acid. Dry point involves scratching directly onto the plate using a sharp tool. So this was the technique we went over in the last lesson, to kind of get the feel for what etching kind of looks like. So I'm just going into this for more detail, and this is probably, it'll be an easier technique to use for your final piece if you're using just what you have around your house. The scratching in dry point printing creates grooves, and when you apply the ink it settles into these grooves. This results in a print which is soft, has rich lines that almost looks like a drawing. So let me show you what I mean. So I've collected a few examples of dry point printings themselves, along with what it looks like when you carve it onto the plastic. So looking at these examples, do you notice how the lines look softer and less defined than lino or etched prints? This technique often is used for portraits, animals, or expressive pieces because of its ability to create depth and movement. So just looking over these examples, so they use cross-hatching, which is like the little crosses that go over the top of each other, kind of creating shadows and depth, as well as just much more line work in comparison to the other printing techniques, just because you are able to get those smaller details. Looking at these, you can kind of get an idea for whether you want to use this technique for your final piece. So if you have in your mind for your final piece, you have something that needs detail, you're probably going to lean towards using dry point printing, just because it's going to allow you to express yourself a lot easier than just the solid kind of prints that lino does make, especially if you're not too comfortable with the lino printing technique. So now I'm going to walk you through the process of creating a dry point print. If you have these materials at home, which you most likely will, even using like the back of an old CD or old DVD, that's a great way to do it, and just a nail or some sort of sharp tool that you can scratch into the back of the plastic. Feel free to follow along just to practice. We've kind of already practiced this in the last lesson, so this was the makeshift etching, as I said before. So yeah, so firstly you want to prepare the plate. So you'll need a plate to work on. Most artists use plexiglass because it's easy to scratch into. If you don't have these, like I said, you could use an old CD, a DVD, anything along those lines. Second is scratching the design. You need to use a dry point needle or a sharp tool to start scratching your design into the plate. You can scratch lightly at first and then go over the lines again to make them deeper. Remembering the deeper the lines, the darker it will print. So I kind of talked about this before. You can use cross-hatching techniques, dots or curves to add texture. This will add more depth. It's kind of like adding shading to a drawing, but instead with scratches. Next, you'll be inking the plate. So next you'll apply the ink to the plate using a brush or a piece of cloth, working the ink into the grooves and then gently wiping away the excess with a soft cloth or paper towel. Even you can use newspaper if this will get rid of as much ink off the surface of the plate as you need to. The goal for this is to leave just ink in the scratch lines. So when you're printing, you want to place it on a damp piece of paper and apply pressure. So if you have access to a press, you can use that, or you can use your hands with a rolling pin, which is probably easier if you're working on this at home. When you lift the paper, your print will reveal itself. And obviously you want to try to let it dry before you kind of work around with it. So now that you have experience with all three techniques, it's time to start planning your final artwork. This will be a piece that represents you, your story, your emotions, and something that you want to share with the world. So let's just break that down into manageable steps. So firstly, you want to brainstorm the ideas. We've done this throughout all three of the lessons. You started kind of brainstorming within the first two, especially with lino printing. But to kind of have some questions that you can answer within your sketchbook or journal, just to kind of get your brainstorming thinking further, is what message or emotion do you want to share? Which technique do you want to use for your final piece? I would suggest lino or dry point, just because etching with the use of acid and stuff is probably not something you're able to do at home. But if you have access to the equipment and you're safely working on it, you can try etching. And how can you use line, texture and composition to express your ideas? So then in the second step, you want to create a rough sketch. So now that you have an idea in mind, you want to start sketching a rough design. Remember, it doesn't need to be perfect because it is just a plan. Focus on your chosen technique and how this will enhance the final piece. So if you're doing lino printing, you obviously don't want a very intricate sketch because you're not going to be able to achieve that with lino. If you want, that's why you have to really consider what printmaking technique you're going to be using, because it has to suit the idea of what you want to be making. Because if you want an intricate piece, you're going to have to lean towards dry print. More simplistic, most likely you'll be using lino printing. Remember that all your ideas are unique, and this is about self-expression, so there's no wrong or right answer. There's no wrong or right when it comes to your sketch, because it's just something that's going to represent you. And you want to show what you have learnt throughout these lessons and what technique you feel most comfortable to be able to use. So really think about what you're doing and try to go back over the lessons if you need to. If you're not too sure what technique is going to work best for you, or look back on the work that you have done and think about which technique was most efficient for you. The next steps and wrapping up the lessons that we have had, you've all done such an amazing job throughout this unit and the work that we've done so far. So in today's lesson, we reviewed the key differences between lino etching and dry point printing. You learned how to dry point adds a new layer of texture and detail to your prints. You started planning your final artworks that reflect your individuality and creativity. Going forth, and for your final assignment, you need to have finished your design sketch, gathered your materials for your chosen technique, and started creating your final piece. So I look forward to seeing your final pieces. If you have any questions or need any help with anything, just get in contact with me. I'm excited to see your visions come to life. Great job throughout this unit, and enjoy the rest of your day.